My husband made a suggestion so bold, so unexpected, that I would never have imagined it would touch me so deeply. But that night, everything changed. With unnerving calm, my husband proposed something that had never crossed my mind. He told me to be intimate with 3 men, and most surprising of all, I couldn't turn down the idea. Before continuing the story, I ask you for a second to give a like to the video. It doesn't bother you at all, and it helps me a lot. Let's continue. But what happened next was far beyond what any of the 3 of us could have foreseen. Even today, when I close my eyes, I can vividly recall that night. It was a hot, heavy summer night, and I came home exhausted, overwhelmed by the demands of the day. When I walked through the door, however, I found my husband Ezekiel in the living room, as quiet as ever, a glass of whiskey in his hand, but with a gaze fixed on me that chilled me to the bone. That intense gaze, charged with something else, made me wonder if he really understood what was about to happen. With an intensity I hadn't seen before, I noticed something different in his demeanor. That night, something that made the air feel thick with anticipation. As I sat down next to him, I could feel his eyes on me, studying my every move. "How did it go at work?" he asked me, his voice unusually soft, almost seductive. I shrugged my shoulders, letting out a tired sigh. "The usual," I told him. "A long and tiring day." But I could tell my husband Ezekiel wasn't paying attention to my words. Instead, he placed his hand gently on my thigh. I was used to his gestures of affection, but that night, there was a different energy between us. With his fingers, he began to run down my leg. I turned to look at him, feeling my heart racing. His eyes showed a hunger, a desire that felt new and exciting. He began to speak and said to me, "I've been thinking," and paused as he leaned closer to me, his voice barely a whisper. He continued to speak and repeated, "I've been thinking about us, about something we need." His words sent a tremor through me, and I shifted in my seat, unsure of Asia where he was going with all this. "What do you mean?" I asked, with a slight tremor in my voice. My husband Ezekiel smiled. His hand was moving up a little higher, and I felt his warm breath brush against my ear. "I think we need something different, something to give a touch of excitement to our relationship." I swallowed hard, feeling a knot forming in my stomach. "To give our relationship some excitement," I repeated, unsure of what I meant. He felt and kissed my neck. "I want to see you with other men," he whispered to me. His words were sending shock waves through my body. For a moment, I was speechless, my mind reeling from what I had just heard. In that instant, I pulled away, searching his face for some sign of hesitation or regret for what he had said, but found only raw desire on his face, unfiltered. "Do you want to see me with other men?" I asked, my voice low, barely audible. My husband Ezekiel nodded, his dark eyes full of lust. "Yes, but I don't want you to be with just any man," he said. "I want you to be with 3 strong, handsome, dark-skinned men. I want to see you lose yourself in his arms, feel his touch, and experience something new, something wild." My mind started racing with a million thoughts. I had never in my life imagined anything like this. I never thought my husband Ezekiel would even consider the idea of sharing me with other men. But when I looked into his eyes, I could see the excitement there on his face, the excitement of the forbidden. Strangely, and without lying to you, I tell you that a part of me was intrigued by the idea. I was curious about what it would be like, what it would feel like to be craved by men other than my husband, what it would feel like to be touched by his hands, to be kissed by his lips. At that moment I moved. I was uncomfortable, but my body betrayed me, and at that instant I felt a wave of heat come over me. "I don't know, Ezekiel," I said in a way that I stammered, and I wasn't sure how to answer him. At that moment, my husband Ezekiel took my hand and squeezed it gently. He said to me, "I know this sounds crazy, but I promise you it will be amazing. You will love it, and I will be there watching you, admiring you. I swear to you, love, there is nothing to be afraid of. His words washed over me, and I found myself considering the possibility that I could actually do this. I could be with 3 other men while my husband watched us. The idea felt so absurd, so wrong, but at the same time, all of it ignited a spark deep inside me, one I hadn't felt in a long time. I looked into my husband Ezekiel's eyes, searching for any sign of hesitation, but found only unwavering confidence. He wanted this. He wanted me to do this, and the thought of pleasing him, of giving him what he wanted, sent a surge of adrenaline through me. "Okay," I whispered, barely recognizing my own voice. I told him, "I'll do it." My husband's eyes lit up, and he stood up, excited, and leaned down to kiss his soft, warm lips against mine. "You won't regret this," he said, and promised me, his voice full of anticipation. The days leading up to the night my husband had planned were filled with a strange mix of excitement and nerves. Every time I thought about what was to come, my stomach churned with a mixture of anxiety and desire. I tried to push those thoughts away, tried to focus on my usual routine, but the anticipation was always there, hovering in the back of my mind, taunting me with the possibilities of what was to come. And then finally, that night came. My husband had already arranged everything. The men he had chosen, they were already there at the hotel when we arrived. They were waiting for us. As my husband and I walked into the room, my palms were sweating with nerves. But as soon as I saw the 3 of them standing there, with confident smiles on their faces, something inside me changed. These men were tall, muscular, and their dark skin glowed in the soft light of the room. Each of them exuded power and strength. I could feel their eyes on me, undressing me with their gazes. Suddenly, my breath caught in my throat as I stood there, suddenly feeling exposed and vulnerable, but also strangely empowered. My husband stood beside me, his hand on my lower back, guiding me forward. "Don't be shy," my husband whispered in my ear, his voice charged with emotion. He said, "This is for you. I want you to enjoy it." I looked at him with my heart racing and saw the hunger in his eyes. He really wanted this. He wanted to see me with these men. And as nervous as I was, I couldn't deny that a part of me wanted it too. Slowly, I took a step forward, my body trembling. The men looked at me, their dark eyes full of appetite. And as I approached them, I felt the tension in the room grow thicker. I was standing on the edge of something new, something exciting, and I was ready to dive into that experience. The first man reached out his hand and brushed my arm, conveying a sense of energy and confidence. His touch was firm but comforting, and I found myself trusting him. I took a deep breath as his fingers traced my arm in a friendly manner. Our eyes met, and in his I sensed a sincere and determined look, an assurance that resonated with me. Without realizing it, we had already connected in a special way, based on respect and authenticity. As I drew closer, I felt my heart race. I let go, feeling the support of his strong arms. They held me firmly. I could feel the warmth of his closeness and his muscles tensing as I ran my hands over them. Behind me, I felt my husband's gaze on me, his eyes fixed on my figure. I looked over my shoulder and caught his gaze. The expression on his face caused a surge of emotion in me. He wanted this. He wanted me to be in that moment. He wanted to see me sharing this space with someone else. Well, let him enjoy it now because I like it. The second man took a step forward, and his hand slid around my waist, pulling me closer. I could feel the warmth of his breath on my neck as his presence grew closer. My body was trembling, and my mind was spinning with the intensity of the situation. I had never experienced anything like this before. This overwhelming feeling of being valued, of being appreciated by not just one person, but 3. It was a shocking experience, and I felt absorbed by it. My body reacted to every gesture, every word. My husband's voice broke through the cloud of thoughts that clouded my mind. "You are beautiful," he whispered, his voice charged with emotion. "I love seeing you like this." His words filled me with confidence. And as I turned my attention to the men in front of me, I noticed their presence intensifying. As they drew closer, their gazes enveloped me with a palpable energy. The closeness of their bodies conveyed a warmth to me that I had not anticipated. I hadn't realized how much I had wanted to feel seen that way. My breathing deepened as their gestures filled me with a sense of power and determination. Each touch sent a new wave of sensation through me. There was a strange sense of empowerment, knowing that I was the center of his attention, that I was being heard and seen. The man in front of me pressed his hand on my lower back, pulling me closer until our bodies were almost aligned. I could feel his closeness, the heat radiating from him. I could feel every inch of his huge tool. His breath hitched near my cheek as he leaned toward me, seeking to capture my gaze again. This time the kiss wasn't soft. It was intense, as if he was searching for something deeper. His approach, full of urgency, took my breath away. I felt the pressure of his hands on my waist, as if he didn't want to let me go. Behind me, the second man moved his hand along my sides, following the curve of my waist delicately. His touches were firm, but not invasive, and I could feel the intensity of the situation, how each of them was present in that moment, sharing the same space and energy. I could feel the tension rising inside me, a tight spiral of uncertainty, intensifying with every second. My husband was still there, watching everything unfold. His presence anchored me to reality, even as I felt myself slipping into the fascination of the moment. His eyes bored into mine, and I could see the intensity in his gaze, the way he was enjoying this process as much as I was. I wasn't just watching, I was part of it, part of this deep connection that was being forged between these men and me. "You are so beautiful," the third man whispered, his voice low and soft as he moved closer. His fingers ran down my arm in a slow, careful caress. "I've been waiting to feel the softness of your skin." I shuddered at his words. My body reacted instinctively, and I leaned into him as his arms gently wrapped around my waist. The way they surrounded me, how they treated me, made me feel vulnerable yet safe, as if everything was happening beyond my control. I let myself be carried away by the intensity of the moment. Every inch of my skin was alert, vibrant with the energy of the situation, as his hands moved delicately along my body. The man behind me whispered softly in my ear, his voice filled with an intensity I could not ignore. I felt a tightness in my chest, as if my breathing became more labored as the situation progressed. My thoughts were becoming confused, struggling between the attraction I felt and the questions that were beginning to arise in my mind. "You like this?" he murmured, and his voice, filled with a deep curiosity, echoed inside me. I felt a tremor, not just physical, but something deeper, as if the emotional connection of that moment was more intense than anything I had ever experienced before. I had never felt such a strong pressure inside me, a mixture of desire and fear. "I love it," I whispered, my voice basiliant, charged with an emotion I couldn't define. There was something about that closeness that made me uneasy and at the same time attracted me. The way they looked at me, the way they made me feel, seemed to awaken something inside me, something I had not recognized before. Each word they spoke seemed to reach deeper, as if they were opening doors in my soul that I had never intended to explore. The man in front of me smiled, and with a gentle gesture, touched my hair, pulling me even closer to him. At that moment, I realized that what puzzled me most was how my mind and body reacted so contradictorily, caught between the desire to understand what was happening and the uncertainty of what I was feeling. The kiss this time was slower, more reflective, with a softness that contrasted with the intensity of what I was feeling inside. His mouth brushed mine with a tenderness that confused me, provoking an involuntary response in me. My mind was in a whirlwind of thoughts, wondering if this was what I really wanted, if this moment was as real as I felt it to be. I felt his hand touch my face, such a simple gesture, but one that connected me deeply with the situation. Something about his touch made me hesitate, made me question what was happening, but it also kept me there, caught up in the force of the emotion of the moment. Behind me, the pressure of his fingers reminded me that things were not completely under my control, but it was not a feeling of discomfort, but of vulnerability, of this response, of being aware that every action and every thought was being watched. Uncertainty was mixed with a desire to understand what I was really feeling. "Please," I whispered, my voice broken by the need for answers, by the need to know where we were headed. The silence that followed was charged with a palpable tension, as if time had stopped in that instant. "We are not going to stop," he responded with a deep promise, his deep voice conveying something more than words, something that seemed to be directed at my heart. The knot of uncertainty inside me tightened tighter and tighter with each passing second, caught between fear of the unknown and fascination for what was to come. My body was trembling, not from desire, but from the mixture of emotions running through me: anxiety, desire for release, but also the feeling that this was all just the beginning of something much bigger and more confusing. The man in front of me looked at me for a moment before smiling, his gaze fixed on mine. "You're amazing," he murmured, and something in his tone, charged with admiration, made me feel a deep connection. It wasn't just an empty compliment. I felt his words were a reflection of something more, of genuine appreciation. "I can't wait to see how you feel," she added, subdued but intense. Suddenly her hands moved swiftly and fluidly, stripping me of some of my clothing. The dress slipped off my shoulders and fell to the floor in a soft rustle of fabric. I was left standing, put on in a different way, vulnerable in a way I had never experienced before. But instead of discomfort or embarrassment, I was overcome with a sense of power. It wasn't the kind of power that can be described in physical terms, but an internal feeling as if I had total control over what was happening. I felt something inside me awaken, that this vulnerability connected me to an inner strength I had never known before. It was as if every look I received not only evaluated me, but understood me on a deep level. I could also feel Ezekiel's gaze. It was a mixture of pride and something else, something that I could not identify exactly, but that made me feel that his support was present, giving me strength to move forward. His presence made me more aware of the direction I was heading in, and something in his expression conveyed to me that, somehow, this moment was also meaningful to him. The second man moved closer, and his hands rested on my waist as he gently guided me toward the bed. "Lie down," he whispered, coming up softly but with a tone that made it clear he expected my obedience. My heart began to pound in anticipation of what was to come as I settled onto the soft sheets. Although my body was trembling slightly, it was a mixture of emotions, not only of desire, but also of uncertainty and expectation. The three men surrounded me, but it was not their physical proximity that made me uneasy. It was the mixture of looks and silences charged with something undefined, a tension that could not define. Their gestures were like an unspoken poem, a silent exchange that filled me with scattered thoughts. I didn't know what to expect, but I felt that the moment was charged with something profound. One of them came closer, and his kiss was so warm and full of intensity that it made me lose myself for an instant in what it might mean. Another whispered something in my ear, words that I didn't quite catch, but that somehow made me feel a little more connected to what was happening. Each of them seemed to be expecting something from me. And even though I felt overwhelmed by all that was happening, there was a sense of growth, of learning something new about myself, something I hadn't explored before. My mind and my body were in conflict, but a part of me wanted to move forward, understanding that, although I didn't have it all figured out, I was experiencing something important, something that would mark a before and after in my life. My husband's voice broke through the fog of my thoughts. His words, soft but charged with emotion, echoed in my mind. "You are amazing," he whispered, It made me feel such a deep connection that my heart raced. The way he looked at me, his approval, made everything seem more real, more intense. I felt a desire to please him, to show him how much I cared, that he could see what he meant to me, every shared moment. The man next to me moved closer to speak to me, his voice warm and sincere. "You are so beautiful," he murmured, his words full of affection and admiration. Despite the emotional tension, a part of me wanted to be vulnerable, to let myself be swept up in the moment. But there was something else unfolding inside me, a deep understanding of myself, of what it meant to be in that place with these people, living what I was living. I felt the situation pushing me into unknown places where my emotions took over, making each moment feel more overwhelming, but in a way that also freed me. I wanted more of that connection, more of that intensity. But I was also faced with the question of whether I was ready to explore beyond what I knew. My thoughts were intertwined as my mind was racing, unable to find the words to describe what I was feeling. My body trembled, and my breathing became ragged as I struggled to focus on the moment. I felt myself letting go, surrendering to an overwhelming mix of emotions, a feeling of completeness, as if I was finally being seen and understood in a way I had never imagined. The intensity of it all was far more than I had expected, more than I could have dreamed. As the intensity began to fade, I stood there, breathless and exhausted. I was surrounded by the warmth of the people who had been part of this emotional journey, taking me to a place I never thought I would visit. Their gestures softened, turning into caresses that seemed to reconnect something inside me. As we all began to return to calm, my mind was still spinning about everything I had experienced, but a strange sense of satisfaction came over me. It was a sense of deep fulfillment that came not only from the physical, but from the emotional connection I had experienced. Knowing that my husband, Ezekiel, had wanted this for me, as much as I did, filled me with an inexplicable gratitude. I looked at him, and the look of pride and love in his eyes was all I needed to see. My husband moved closer to me, his hand gently touching my face tenderly, before leaning down to kiss me gently. "You are amazing," he whispered, his voice full of emotion. "I knew this moment would be unforgettable, but you are more than I ever dreamed." His words filled me with a deep sense of love and gratitude. As I lay there, surrounded by the men who had been by my side and the man I loved, I realized something profound. It was not just about indulging some fantasy, but about trust, about giving myself completely, knowing that I was appreciated and valued. We had stepped into something new together, something that had only brought us closer together, strengthening our connection in a way I had not anticipated.